Hello, welcome. This is day 12 of 99 Days of Deeper Embodiment. My name is Jason King. Welcome to my live stream. Today is a bit of an experiment as far as the live stream is concerned. This is the first time I'm streaming outside without Wi-Fi. So let me know how it goes for you. I'm streaming directly from the phone um, because I wanna be able to sit outside. It's really beautiful out today. It's a super gorgeous day. I'm still in New York. And it feels like later on this week I'll be driving out to Utah. And so there'll be some days of streaming where I'll be on the road. And so I felt like today would be a fun day to test out the technology for that. And it looks like I can do this with the phone, although it's a little bit funky here because the camera's on the left. In order to get the widescreen shot, I have to like turn the phone and look at where the camera is. But it's pretty cool. So it gets a really tight shot in of my face. There's no way to kind of get it out a little bit further, otherwise it's a little awkward. But we'll see. We'll have some fun with that. So today's satsang, I really felt like it would be fun to share a little bit deeper on the story of Jason King. How is it that I come to be here sharing 99 days on deeper embodiment of the self? And so it's an important sharing today because it really illuminates a bit of the topic as far as what exactly is embodiment of the self. What does it mean when I talk about embodiment of the self? Just getting myself settled here a bit. So when I talk about embodiment of the self, there is an aspect of embodiment of the self where identification of the self is required within oneself. A realization of self with a big S is required. It's quite impossible to embody something if you're not able to see it within you. Because then what is embodying? There's nothing embodying. There's just ideas. There's no embodiment at all. There's just mind movement. And so in truth, this 99 days is targeted at a specific audience, an audience that already has a realization of what is the self. Because it's quite difficult to point to embodiment if there isn't a realization. It's not just difficult, it's impossible because there's no understanding. There's no actual embodiment happening. And so before embodiment, I can point to realizing the self, seeing the self within you. What is truth? What is the self within you? And point towards that. But this level of seeing where we're actually moving deeper into embodiment, it requires an introduction to the self, first and foremost. You need to have a transmission of what the self is. You need to already recognize the self in you. You need to already know what the frequency, what the vibration, what the dimension of silence is. Otherwise, there's nothing to embody. And so I will share some of my story so that it becomes more clear to you what embodiment is through my own experience, through my own story. Let's move this over here. I'm feeling into where we want to start in the timeline of this body as far as to illustrate this aspect. So just a moment here. So it feels good to start at a point where I had a spiritual experience, a very profound spiritual experience. And with this spiritual experience, I had been doing a plant dieta, which is a method of learning. It's a method of learning, um, a traditional method of learning how to heal with plants, but how to heal in the format of a curandero in the Amazon, which would be a traditional Amazonian healer. And so I was doing a long dieta of 4 months. And so during this 4 month dieta, I was only eating rice and lentils. And there was periods of extensive fasting as well. So the only thing that I ate was rice and lentils without salt, without sugar. The only thing that I drank was water. There was no sex involved. It was very rigid, the format, very traditional, the format, designed to lighten the body very rapidly and to bring the body into the frequency of a plant, embodying a plant, the consciousness of a plant. And this is something that is done in the Amazon and has been done for a very long time in the Amazon to be able to use those energies to influence reality, to heal the body and many other things for magic. And it's quite effective. However, at the same time, it's as much as it's effective in shifting the body, it's working within the illusion, it's working within the body. But what it did do for me was it brought a level of focus, it brought a level of concentration that I hadn't embodied previously. Because in order to do something this extreme with the body, I had to focus my consciousness a lot, a tremendous amount. And at this point, I was an apprentice with a very experienced curandera, a curandera that had the ability to heal cancer with song, that had the ability to heal many, many diseases with song. She was sought out and looked for because of her ability to go into the body and clear out very difficult traumas and very difficult illnesses simply with song. And I was apprenticing with her at the time. And as I apprenticed with her and as I was on this dieta, I began to develop these abilities myself in very powerful ways. And they began to simply show themselves. And so there was a time during this dieta where I was spending a lot of time alone because that is the design of a dieta. And I had what I would call a heart opening awakening. This is not my word for it either. This is a word that came later. At that point in time, I would have just called it, oh, my heart opened. I didn't have words like awakening at that point in time. This is something that I had to ground in over a course of a long period of time. I had to integrate this experience. And so now I have a vocabulary to describe it, which makes it easier. It makes it easier to relate. And so when the heart opened, I saw it as a doorway. It just opened. And in my experience, it opened on the right side, energetically. So a right side heart opening. Energetically, the heart can be seen as both sides. And so when this opened, then I had a direct experience of the self in that moment. Unmistakable clarity in that moment. Mm. And I've been integrating that ever since. This happened in 2015. And when the heart opened over the course of a few day period, then I popped out of what we would call reality into something that is indescribably different. Indescribable, period. There's no words for it. If I were to try to put words to it, it would be something to the effect of seeing everything, but from the perspective of the observer, and seeing that there's no actual solidity to anything at all. It's all just thoughts that are basically floating through a field of awareness. And that is the best that words can do for it. And so my spiritual experience and awakening at this point was quite drastic in 2015. It was very jolting in a way. And it was this way because of the work that I had been doing with plants at the time and the extreme dieta and the way that my body was extremely light. There's many people now in my experience that do have awakening, that are awakening, that don't have any drastic experience like this at all. They do have they pass through spiritual experiences which are markers of awakening. However, they don't have to be this drastic. It was drastic for me because of how light my body was at the time. I was living in Peru and I was consciously lightening my body. And interestingly enough, in order to be able to integrate this in a way that allows this body to actually be of service, I've had to, what we might call, unlighten the body and be able to feel all the way through. And so in having the body so light, what my experience was at that point was that I couldn't sit with very heavy thoughts. They would be too cumbersome, too difficult to feel for the body. They'd be too painful. And so part of my path at this point was to go into what I would call the depths of hell many times over, to go deep into feeling what is what could even be described as demonic in some ways, in some ways of seeing. However, at this level of seeing where I'm seeing from, I don't consider anything to be anything other than the self. However, within the structure of mind and the way the egoic mind is built, it can be seen that there are energies which are very dark. They're very closed to truth. And in this closedness to truth, there is what what is described within a dualistic way of seeing, what is described within a paradigm where there is a battle between light and dark, what can be described as demonic. And so many times over, I went into what I would call hell realms, all within myself. You see, this is a purification process. It's an integration process that I went through and experienced over the past, now 7 years. And so in this integration, what has begun to embody in this body as the self is the ability to be with any thought, the ability to be present with any idea, no matter how dark it is, any perspective, no matter how light it is or dark it is, to simply allow it to be there. And so directly after this spiritual experience, I went through what I would call an incredibly dark period, um, what is often referred to as a dark night of the soul, because in the heart opening, then all the trauma, all the ideas forming the structure of the mind in this body began to just be felt in rapid succession. And the funny thing about this is that all of these ideas, when they are identified with, is that they act as a magnet that pulls in more ideas. So not having any experience with this whatsoever, not having anyone to guide me or knowing anything about it, and just going off of it through through basically feeling, through trust and feeling of what I would describe the divine. I didn't die. Not physically anyway. Didn't die in a physical death. The body still is here. I died what I might call a spiritual death over and over and over again. Many times over. Because all of the ideas of who and what I am have I've had to feel through them very quickly even. I mean, because when we're talking about time, integrating even one lifetime, and the lifetime that I lived prior to this experience and prior to this unfolding was quite difficult. A lot of trauma, tremendous amount of pain, honestly, of separation, ideas of separation, very heavy ideas. Um, I was in the military. I was um, also playing out ideas of being gay, being homosexual, and also drug abuse. A lot of feeling and being separate. I mean, the exploration that I was having prior to awakening and what pushed me towards it, what propelled me towards it, was very dense, very closed, balancing out distortions between the masculine and the feminine and how they show up. And so, in the process of integration, what I've seen is that the self is always present. And so, the process of embodiment, once the self is seen with clarity, is simply stabilizing in that awareness, stabilizing in that seeing all the time, no matter what is arising, no matter what the body is experiencing. And so this is where there was a lot of confusion because initially I just wanted to get back to that place. I just wanted to get back to feeling that wholeness, to feeling that to basically popping out of this reality, out of this illusion, and that's all that I was interested in afterwards. I was like, what is this? I don't want to be here anymore. I don't know why I'm experiencing this reality. I don't know why I'm here in this dream, but it just wasn't real to me anymore. And so I wanted to get back to where it was real. I wanted to get back to that, and so I began doing lots of practices all the time, a lot of spiritual practices, moving along a path of ascension that showed up for me. And all of that was helpful because it helped me to integrate, it helped me to stabilize. And so now I'm speaking more about embodiment and deeper embodiment in a way that can be useful, that can be helpful for anyone who is embodying the self. Because there are a lot of beings that are waking up, that are having spontaneous awakening. And we can call, I mean, initially I thought, oh, I'm feeling everything that everyone is thinking. I'm feeling all of these thoughts and emotions that are in others. Then I'm an empath. So initially that was the way that I saw it. It's like, oh, I, I'm feeling, I'm feeling my mother rage, her rage, even when she's speaking in a normal tone. And it was like, whoa, what is this? I don't understand. Why is she screaming at me? That's what it felt like. It felt like, oh, there's a lot of anger here. And then because I was heavily identified with the body, and because I was heavily identified with um, another body, my mother, the projection of a mother, then it got turned into this story of um, my mother being angry at me and hurting me. And so the identity of an empath showed up. And so I began to take it all personally. Like, oh, here I am feeling the weight of the world, and the world is crucifying me. And that gets incredibly heavy and it becomes incredibly painful. That's I experienced that for a good amount of time. I was after this experience, I couldn't hold a normal job anymore. It was impossible. And I lost my income. I had been teaching in Peru and I could no longer teach. It just didn't work. And so I moved back to the United States and immediately got thrust into trying to pick up my old life that I had been living in the United States prior to moving to Peru and apprenticing with curanderos there. And then in trying to recreate that old idea of myself based on the memories that I had of who and what I am and where I come from in the timeline of this body, then shortly I discovered that all of that had to go. And when I say shortly, I don't actually mean shortly because it played out over years. It's not something that played out in one day. But little by little by little, it's been a process of letting go. Letting go of all the ideas of who and what I think I am and what I think this is. And the more and the deeper that I let go, the more that is shed, the more that the clarity that is just takes over. There's nothing left other than that. And when I say the clarity that is the experiences, is that it's I'm in a body and yet there's no thoughts, none at all. There's just clarity here. And clarity does what clarity wants to do. It's moving everything anyway, even when there is heavy mind structures involved. That's also the self in a manner of seeing. And so this can be explained in a way where we can take it into a way of speaking about God, in a way of speaking about the divine. However, talking about God and talking about the divine and talking about Christ and talking about Christ consciousness, all of that for most beings gets brought into the realm of mind. It gets brought into story, and there's more identification created around it rather than popping into truth, rather than embodying self, rather than seeing that that's all there is and ever was. Rather than getting more simple, it gets more complex. And so it can be really helpful to have an understanding or to have a view of the body where there is a divine child that is ascending. That can be a helpful imagery. It can be a helpful way of seeing awakening. And it's been helpful for me. It's been helpful in my own integration. And yet it needs to also be discarded, because to hold on to that is to then be running another story, then be moving back into mind. So when clarity is speaking, when we're speaking about embodiment, when we're speaking about embodiment of clarity, of truth, then it's always about less mind, less thought, always pointing back to here, centered, as what is, without any thoughts around it, without any thoughts about it. And that is what has stabilized me in time. The only way that I've been able to integrate the degree of awareness that showed up for this body is through a tremendous amount of meditation and continuing meditation all the time until meditation is constant. And in that, there is not identification with thoughts showing up. There's not identification with the body or what the body is going through, or what the body is experiencing. There's simply a seeing of what is. And so, anyone who's interested in embodiment, interested in integrating, and there's a lot of what I would call newly awakening empaths that need embodiment desperately at this point. And why would they need embodiment? The reason, I just realized I left my other phone on the bench. I'm going to walk. The reason they need embodiment is because every time there's identification with what is being felt, then that identification with that thought then pulls in more thoughts just like it. And so if I'm feeling the thoughts that are there, and I identify with that thought, then all of a sudden, more thoughts just like that show up. And as the collective is lightening and the bodies within the collective are lightening, this can be extremely painful. This is my experience. This is what I've seen unfolding with what we're calling COVID as well. In my seeing, what is happening with COVID is that there's very little embodiment. There's very little presence in the body. There's a lot of mind structures, but very little embodiment. And so as there's higher frequencies, higher levels of awareness within the collective, there's more of a necessity for embodiment. Because if there isn't embodiment, then there's only identification with what is being felt. And if there's only identification with what is being felt, then all of a sudden, all of those ideas get pulled into the body and result in essentially the inability to meet all of those ideas all at once. It's as if all of the heavy ideas fly into the heart and there's no ability to be present with them, to feel them all at once. Because there's not enough presence embodied. And so the body collapses. And so I bring this out in this way at this time, having had this experience myself, and not just having had the experience, but also supporting many others through it. Because we're at a critical moment where there needs to be a lot of clarity around it, so that what is experienced is useful, in the sense that rather than moving into fearful ideas around it, we can actually embody and ascend, evolve.